Back when video game graphics looked like this, it was crucial to create an art style that fit the game's mood and design, all while staying within the hardware's limitations. You see, back then you couldn't just put lens flares and fancy textures on everything. You had to make every polygon and pixel count. These limitations forced the studs behind our favorite games to get creative, which led to some pretty cool visuals. As time went on and huge jeans went out of fashion, so did these unique art styles. Now that your average Joe knows who these characters are and their political standings, art styles aren't really as common anymore. Not to mention that our consoles are no longer running on mouse power and the player's imagination. That's not to say that they're pointless or even completely dead, they just aren't as prevalent nowadays. Although a game's art direction doesn't affect gameplay, I think it's still important. It can make the game feel much more unique and immersive. So what happened to art styles? Well, first we have to go back to the beginning. It all started in 1972 with the Magnavox Odyssey. Nah, I'm just kidding. Can you imagine if I actually did that shit? I'd say that video game art styles really started to go bananas in the 90s with the Super Nintendo and Genesis. All these different games were coming out with new ideas and characters. While this was past the era of two colored squares, we still don't have the technology to give Mario nipples. What does this mean? I don't know. Well, two things. First, developers were now able to make their games more distinguishable and unique from one another, and second, we had to wait over 30 years to get a look at these bad boys. You had two fighting games brawling over who could brainwash the most kids, Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat. Since Street Fighter already had a chokehold on the market, Mortal Kombat had to get 90s with it and use digitized sprites to set itself apart. Yes, I know the games are pretty different in their own regards, but you go ahead and explain that to Ben's mom over here, struggling to find which Mortal Street game her son wanted. The hunks over at Rare caught a glimpse of these radical sprites and decided they wanted to do something similar for the return of the mother effing Kong. With a more distinguished outfit and defined boobs, Donkey Kong had his own new art style that is still beloved by many. Now that all modern first-person shooters look like they take place in a futuristic urinal, it's a little crazy to think about where it all started. Wolfenstein 3D, which, you know, Wikipedia says is basically the father of all FPS games, had you going down gray stone hallways killing Nazis. Doom, on the other hand, said, how about we kill some real creepy demons instead? Creepy demons from hell? Developers were beginning to really understand 2D graphics, but it was obvious that the world around them was changing, even if they didn't want it to. After their rocky start, I think 3D games are when these art styles entered their golden age. During the 6th generation of consoles is when video game art styles really hit their stride. It seemed like every game that was released had its own visual style. Even though stores were now selling more first-person shooters than food, each one still felt different. The Halo series was finding its way into the hands of every monster-chugging, hair-spiking, and authority-disrespecting kid. Yet Master Chief lugging his cake around using all kinds of cool-looking alien guns was very different from Gordon Freeman lugging his cake around killing all kinds of cool-looking aliens. But let's be real, the shooters weren't really the most creative looking games at the time. The underappreciated Pikmin series had an art style focused on being as realistic and organic as possible. This game still looks amazing to this day. I don't know how all of these things worked on the GameCube. It couldn't even use real discs. It was obvious that the dark and gritty Legend of Zelda series would follow this style, and this high-tech lunchbox would be home to the most realistic and atmospheric Zelda title yet. Nope. We can't talk art styles without talking about cel-shaded graphics. We just can't, I won't allow it. Wind Waker was a controversial game at the time, but we all know that, we've all seen the video essays. It's the default game that people think of when you mention cel-shaded graphics. And yes, it may be a little overdone now, but some of these titles are just my favorite looking games. Jet Set Radio was just oozing style. Oh my god, it's all over the floor! Although I've never played this game, I'm very familiar with some of its banging ass tunes. The graphics, the animation, the music, the gameplay, the colors, the atmosphere, all combined to make this beautiful soup of I don't know what that is, but I know I want some. Katamari is another quirky game that I'm very fond of. I love the low poly models and the general goofiness of this game. Also, the music is amazing. I was at a game store with my friend one day and he recommended I buy the game since he's already tried it and thought I would enjoy it. We became obsessed with it, singing along to the songs as we dashed across the world. I ended up receiving the Switch remaster from my other friend as a birthday present last year, and I played through it all again a few months ago. It's a very fun game that started with a simple idea and decided to add layers of lore and a beautiful art style to it. Okay, enough show and tell. Up next is Paper Mario. Wow, can you believe there was a time when just about every Mario game didn't have a magic eraser vigorously scrubbed across it to make everything squeaky clean? During this time, the Mario series was allowed to have a bit more depth than a kiddie pool. While Sunshine played it safe, Paper Mario, Super Mario Strikers, and the Mario and Luigi series all had their own distinct look. I could go on and on about all the different art styles that changed the world and saved humanity, but as we approach the 7th and 8th generation of consoles, these creative visuals kind of faded out. So, what happened? Why did creative art styles go out of fashion? At the risk of sounding like an absolute idiot, I think there are a few different reasons. One of which can be traced back to Chicken Little. Or the year Chicken Little was released. Wow, what a stupid transition. 2005 marked the beginning of the 7th generation of consoles. This is where some of our bravest fought in one of humanity's most gut-wrenching wars, the console wars. Playground fights about which console was best were always kind of a thing, but I think this generation had the most dedicated army behind each console. Like previous console disputes, it was mostly about which had the best graphics.
Dude, I could see more leg hairs on Sonic than you can.
This race to the best realism is pretty much what killed unique art styles. I should know, I have a degree from a community college. Companies were listening to what their players wanted, and underneath the screeches and your mom jokes, they heard, "Realistic graphics! Realistic graphics!" Is that peaking? And just like that, it seemed like goofy art styles went on hiatus. Additionally, these more advanced consoles meant that stylized games weren't as necessary anymore. You could pretty much use as many polygons and pixels as you needed. On top of that, gaming was reaching a wide appeal. Companies would rather just play it safe than release something that looked like this. Ew. This expanding market also meant that the passion behind these games was becoming overshadowed by the desire to make profits. Obviously, I'm leaving something out so we can go on to indie games. In short, indie games basically carried in terms of unique art styles. I wonder how many times I've said those words already. Indie and small studios didn't have the resources to create HD models of Pac-Man's abs. They simply had to make do. Whether it was going back to pixel sprites, low poly models, cell shading, or anything else that I didn't mention, they had to take a creative approach to their visuals. Like the early days of video games, these studios had interesting and fun games, but they also used their art styles to attract mates. Customers. That's not to say there were no big budget games that looked distinctive at the time, and not all indie games were visually different. But I don't need to say that. You guys are all smart enough to know that I've been generalizing a lot of aspects. Right? There isn't one single cause that these trends can be pinned to. After all, video games are made by people, so their style and themes are often just a product of their time. In conclusion, video games are art, and when developers take the time to craft a fitting art style, they really drive that point home. Creative art styles kind of died for a bit, but just like those giant pants, they've sort of been making a comeback. Yeah baby, we went full circle. Newer games like Cuphead, Metroid Dread, Deathloop, and Mario Strikers Battle League showed that both indie and AAA titles can use stylized visuals and appeal to as many diaper fillers as possible. Console capabilities have exploded in the past few generations, so developers are able to make pretty much any kind of game they want. With so much money at stake and no practical reasons for them, it's kind of obvious why art styles faded out. Regardless, a game's visuals can really elevate the experience, and it could significantly boost its appeal and spread. Thanks for watching.